Hey everyone, and welcome to my living room. This is one of a set of end tables that I made just about 6 years ago. It's a veneer project with zebra wood on the outside and ash on the inside. I think that it's lasted the test of time as far as design and functionality go. So I've re-edited the video to make it more clear and easier to follow. I've also removed the music, and I've had professional plans made, and I'll have a link to them in the description below. The idea is to, over time, create a collection of furniture with very clear and helpful videos on YouTube and the plans available on my website. If you want to see some of the other things that I've made for this room, stick around, and at the end of the video I'll point them out. For now, let's go back in time. We can see how much the shop has changed and get to work on this project right here. I'm building the cabinets out of 3/4 inch birch plywood. I'll get started by rough cutting the parts to size, and once the pieces are smaller and easier to handle, I'll cut them to their final measurements. Next, I'll rip the edge banding from a piece of solid zebra wood. After ripping the pieces at 3/8 a little heavy, I'll run them through the drum sander to remove the blade marks. Because this cabinet will be open and I'm veneering the inside, I'll attach the edge banding before assembling the cabinet and use simple butt joints. For other cabinets with doors or drawers and no veneer on the inside, I would most likely attach the edge banding after assembling the cabinet and use miter joints at the corners. Here I'm attaching the edge banding with an 18 gauge nailer. At the time, that was the only nail gun I had. Today I would use the 22 gauge nailer, which would leave a smaller hole. Now I can give the parts a good sanding, making sure the edge banding is flush with the plywood. The next step is to cut the veneer to size. I like to cut the veneer so I have at least 1/4 of an inch overhang on all 4 sides. With the parts ready and the veneer cut, it's time to apply the glue. This is the solvent-based contact cement. I like to apply 2 coats of contact cement. The first coat seems to absorb into the material, so I let the first coat dry to touch and then apply a second coat. This approach of applying 2 coats of the contact cement isn't necessarily recommended on the can, but it's just some good advice that I got from somebody who's in the business, and it's worked good for me. After about 15 or 20 minutes, the second coat of contact cement should be dry to touch. The next step is to position and attach the veneer. Using a few sticks will allow you to apply the veneer in the correct position. Once the veneer is in the correct position, remove one of the sticks closest to the edge and apply pressure. Then slowly work your way to the other side. You can use a J-roller to apply pressure to the veneer, but lately I've been using a board with the edge softened using a roundover bit in the router. Using a flush cut bit in the router, I'll trim the overhang. Now that I've finished attaching the veneer to what will be the insides of the cabinet, I can start to build the cabinets, and the first step is to attach the sides to the back. I'm drilling and countersinking holes at 1.5 inches and 7.5 inches. Then I'll flip the tape around and pull from this side and do the same, 1.5 inches and 7.5. Sometimes I like to tack the cabinet together with an 1.25 inch nail, and that just keeps the parts from moving around while you're screwing them together. So now that I've attached the sides of the cabinet to the back, let me explain why I'm building the cabinet this way. So not only does plywood sometimes vary a little bit in thickness, but I'm also adding a veneer on the inside, and that's going to change the width of my overall top and bottom. So by building or attaching the sides to the back first, I can now pull from one side to the other and get an exact measurement. I'm just a little bit less than 18 inches, and I should add that when I cut my top and bottom, I cut them 1/8 of an inch heavy. So now I can rip them to exact size on the table saw. All right, so now I've got both cabinets built and I'm almost ready to start veneering the outside of the cabinets. But before I do that, I want to build the foot or the base of the cabinet. And to get started, I'll rip strips of 3/4 inch plywood at 3 inches. The base of the cabinet is just a simple frame, and whenever you're cutting multiples of a measurement, it will save a lot of time by setting up a stop block on your chop saw. And so now that I've got all of my parts cut to size, I can start to build the base by attaching the sides to the front and back. And the first step is to pre-drill and countersink holes for the screws. I'm using the nail gun to tack these together and just hold everything in place while I get a chance to screw them together with the screw gun. I'm attaching poplar cleats to the base, and this will strengthen the base a little bit, and it also gives me something to attach the base to the bottom of the cabinet. A good wood fill to use when you're working with veneer is Auto Body Bondo. This is a 2-part system that dries very quickly. I'll use the Bondo to fill the countersink holes and any other imperfections in the plywood. Once the Bondo has dried, I'll give the cabinet a good sanding, making sure that all of the surfaces are flush. With the cabinets sanded and ready, again, I'll cut the veneer to size, allowing for 1/4 of an inch overhang on all 4 sides. It's important that you pay attention to the order that you apply the veneer, and only apply contact cement to the surfaces that you're working on. In other words, don't apply contact cement to the sides of the cabinet until you've finished the back and trimmed the overhang. For this cabinet and most cabinets that I make, I'll apply the veneer to the back, then the sides, and last the top. Once the cabinet is finished, the next step is to veneer the base of the cabinet using the same steps. I'm finishing this project with Mohawk's Finisher's Choice Clear Lacquer. I'll apply 3 coats, sanding in between coats with 320 sandpaper. Well, a lot has changed in 6 years with the shop. I look a little bit older, but the one thing that still looks good, I think, is these end tables. And that, for me, is really the goal, trying to always make something that I think is timeless. So now we can take a look around some of the other things that I've built for this room. Number one is the coffee table that's right in front of me. This is made out of quarter sawn and figured white oak. The drawer front is cut out of the same board that the front of the table is made, so the grain matches, and I'm having plans made for this project right now, and that's going to be an upcoming project on my channel. Right across from me is the Jimi Hendrix painting. That's painted on steel, and for the primer I used an oil-based Zinsser, which is what I often use on metal. And then I used latex acrylic paint. To make the metal rust, I used a mixture of water, vinegar, and salt. After it rusted to the point of where I was happy with, I rinsed off the painting, let it dry out, and sprayed it with lacquer. I think that painting now is getting close to 3 years old, and the lacquer just locks everything in and kind of keeps oxygen from getting into the steel. And the painting, as far as does it change, does the rust make the painting change? I don't think so, and if it does, it's not something that bothers me, and if it does, it happens so slowly that you really wouldn't know unless you maybe compared it with a picture taken when it was first made. But I don't mind a painting like that changing with rust over time. Right underneath the Jimi Hendrix painting is walnut, I guess you could call that a sofa table. I think I made that in maybe 1996. If I was going to grade it, I'd give myself a B or a B minus. There's a few design things that I would change if I build it again. I don't think I've ever built anything that's perfect. I don't think anybody has. It's sort of like whenever you're building something, it's sort of a series of compromises. But you try to do your best work, and most people don't notice things that maybe don't make you happy. So there's a few things I would change with that, and I'll probably build a version of that, and that will be another project on the channel, and I'll have plans made for it. Down the way a little bit is a small, I guess you would call that cocktail table. That's made out of Douglas fir. I wouldn't use Douglas fir for that project if I were to make it again. That was kind of a proof of concept. I made it, I think, with 2x8s or 2x6s. The thing with carving Douglas fir, especially those pieces, because the growth rings are so far apart, it's kind of hard to shape. It doesn't shape or sand very nicely. I do like the shape of it. I think it looks good, but I think it would look a lot better making it with a different material. I think if I were to make it again, I might make it out of babinga. So all in all, I'm happy with that design. That project is on my channel, and I'll have a link to it in the description below. To my left here is just a big block of Padauk. This is made of 5 pieces of 8-quarter Padauk, and I glued them together. And I did use biscuits, not for strength obviously, but just to help keep them aligned while I was gluing them together. So I think I set the biscuit pretty deep, maybe 1.25 inches or something, and I've got biscuits in the front and biscuits in the back. Glued it all together, clamped it, and then it didn't require all that much sanding. Behind the leather sofa over here is a white oak sofa table. This is another project that I'm having plans made for right now. I made that in 1995. I've made different variations of it over the years. I've also made different variations of the white oak coffee table, and I've made it in different woods. But I really like that piece of furniture, and I'm looking forward to making that on the channel and having the plans made for it. Again, the front of that sofa table, the drawers are cut out of the same board, so the grain is continuous right through the front. It's so small, that little bit of attention to detail that I think makes something handmade or special. Over to the other corner there is a white oak desk. That's a veneer project. I made that with Baltic birch, and there's a video on that, and I'll have a link to it in the description. I used Baltic birch on that project because Baltic birch is very dense and very heavy, and that made that desk more substantial. So the drawer fronts are solid, and they're quarter sawn, and they're also figured. And the drawer pulls are white oak, and the drawers are made with half-blind dovetails. And I have a video on that. I used I think I used the Rockler jig on that project. And then, of course, it's sitting on hairpin legs. Those are 1/2-inch hairpin legs, which will look a little bit more solid than the 3/8. I thought the 3/8 would look a little bit thin for that, and I like it. Actually, an upcoming project is going to be a matching bench that will go with that desk. That's going to have a white upholstered top, and that's also a project in the near future. Over here, we have a big epoxy painting. I'm not a huge fan of all these epoxy projects that you see all the time. But years and years ago, going back to maybe 1999, 2000, I made epoxy paintings. This painting is stretched, and then it's cut with a razor blade, and then it's stitched back together, and then it's painted with an oil paint. And then once all that is done, it gets, I think, 1 or 2 coats of epoxy, and then it gets adhered to a braced panel, which is made out of 1/4-inch Baltic birch that's braced from behind. It gets glued down, it gets sanded again, it gets either another 1 or 2 coats of epoxy, and then I sprayed it with lacquer. Underneath that painting is a used piece of furniture that I bought that needed some repair, and while I was repairing it, the repairs were pretty extensive. So I ended up just going over the whole piece with zebra wood veneer. So that's a project that is on the channel, and I'll have a link to it. And then sitting on that little cocktail table, if that's what you want to call it, is the chess set that I made. I think it looks pretty cool, but it's not the best as far as functionality. And so I think it's always good to be honest with yourself. This is always about learning. So I probably will make another chess set at some point, and I'll pay a little bit more attention to how the pieces look, because I do think they can get a little confusing when you're playing. So that's about it. I hope that you enjoyed this video and kind of a quick look around the living room. I think my goal when I'm making furniture is always thinking about the space and trying to think about how can I make a piece of furniture that is not going to overwhelm a space, but kind of work with the space. Thanks for tuning in, and I'll see you next time.